Well, hey, friends, this Tuesday, my new book comes out March 31st, The Edge of the Inside. This is a book that has taken me the last 5-6 years to write. It's my journey from being a lead pastor to what I'm doing today and how it has caused me to rethink God in the process. And I think this is going to be an encouragement for you as well. You can check it out at edgeoftheinside.com. Welcome to another episode of Cabernet and Pray, where we sip the wine and we stir the faith. And today we've got a guy with a really cool name. Anthony Parrott is with us. He is a pastor of a local church. He's been in ministry for 17 years and is currently co-leading the Table Church DC with another pastor. He's the husband to Emily, father to Audrey and Wesley, and he is interested in open and relational theology, which we get into in this episode, competent care, and reading the Bible with love and liberation. This is a guy who embodies Jesus, looks like Jesus, and is questioning a lot of things that you may be questioning, and yet has figured out a way to do that within the church and to do it as a pastor. And I think he offers a really unique voice in all of this conversation. So this is episode 69, Psychological Safety.
I've never shared this with anybody publicly.
If this was SportsCenter, that would be like such a hot take. Skip Bayless would have no idea. Stephen A. Smith would have no idea what to say if you drop that down. That is so good.
The joke I always say is like, how'd you learn so much? You gotta drink a lot.
The power of food and beverage to lubricate an environment.
Resistance to change is hurting the church.
I'm not in the camp that God has a penis or a vagina or a body at all. I'm in the camp that God is a universal spirit.
This is the strangest podcast that I have been on. I don't even know what to do.
I'm kind of geeked up about this wine.
So this is my second glass, and it delivers a little more of a punch than I expected. So if I get a little loopy, it's your fault. You told me to drink on this show.
I will also say as a confession, I am a lightweight. So I've had like 3 sips of this wine and I'm already feeling it. So this is fun.
You've uncovered the mystery. You've exposed the formula.
You've just duct taped together a number of things that aren't normally hanging out together, and I'm here for it.
We're going to sit down at table. We're going to have a glass of wine and some food, and we're going to talk about the beauty of Jesus.
Thanks for what you're doing with this podcast and for the creative way you're doing it and the beautiful, positive spirit in which you're doing it.
I really appreciate this venue, what you're doing. It is fun, and yet you dig into the deep stuff.
I've heard about your podcast for a long time, and I love that you're a pastor and that you explore the world of faith through wine. That's very unique.
I never thought of church history in terms of wine drinkers. I love this question. Really got my mind rolling.
You had me with herbaceous notes, I want you to know. I'm ready to just stay here and live in the wine tour.
I will never forget the first time I bought a bottle of wine by myself, which was yesterday.
If you're familiar with drunk history, I thought it's like drunk theology. So I
got a little spicy there. It's the peach wine.
Apparently the wine is, here we are. Queer we are. Beer we are. No, it's wine, Jeremy.
By the way, drinking this Pinot Grigio at 3 o'clock in the afternoon is making me even more direct in my communication than I normally would be.
I know why you had your guests drink wine. It makes sense now. Yeah, I get it. A little bit of liquid courage to really unleash the beast.
I think you've got a good podcast. So throw in the wine bit in there. That's nice, doesn't it? Cabernet and Pray, yeah.
Well, today's guest has some of the coolest glasses you will ever see. Welcome to the podcast, Anthony.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
You are rivaling Greg Boyd as, I think, the coolest glasses we've had on an episode of this podcast.
That is high praise. I don't mind that comparison at all. And it's been a minute since I've actually, looked at Greg Boyd, so I should go make sure that I actually appreciate what you're saying.
He is rocking some red glasses these days.
Okay.
And what's so funny is the first time I saw him wearing these, I was like, what's the story behind these? And he forgot his glasses one day, and someone let him borrow these red ones, and then he got tons of compliments. So then he just is basically like, hey, I'm just going to keep these red ones.
Oh, I mean, that's the 100% what happens, because I got these on a whim and then get compliments on them all the time from every cashier or whatever. And I'm just like, okay, this is my color now. I can't change.
I mean, it kind of becomes like your signature look.
Yeah. And now, like, orange is my thing. I've got the orange iPhone, and I've got orange pens and orange shoes. So, yeah, I'm going to stick with it.
So those of you who are only listening to this, he's wearing orange glasses. If
Yes.
you're trying to put these context clues together of what are we talking about?
Yes,
they're
yes.
very cool, and I had to comment on it.
Well,
'cause
thank you.
I dig it. And here's what I've learned. I once had a pair of red shoes that I thought were this was when Tom's was big. I don't know if you recall that.
Toms, yes.
And I had a pair of red Toms that I thought were so cool. And I wear them one time preaching, and I got blown up by people commenting on these shoes. And it was almost like they were like, hey, we have like an acceptable realm of colors that you're allowed to wear, and you have exceeded that, And I was like so blown. I mean, like the amount of like dozens of people made comments to me about my shoes. I never wore them again. And I was so self-conscious. And so now, I've grown since then. So now I try to embrace it. And whenever I see someone that's like, okay, you probably got comments about that, like I celebrate that about you. So
Thank you.
This is my own healing journey, Anthony.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we could do all sorts of stuff about what we wear and what that says about our psyches. Yeah, there's a pair of red pants I used to wear every Christmas season, like red chinos. And people were always like, okay, it must be Christmas. Anthony's pulled out the red pants.
So I've concluded from all of that I think independence is offensive to people.
Yeah, I think you're right.
When you don't follow along with what everyone else does, it's somehow, and this is like way more psychology than I understand, but somehow it triggers people of like, you're not doing enough yourself. So they get defensive for some reason. But like, whenever someone does something, or like someone, like I had a friend who tried to see how big he could grow his beard just for fun.
Sure.
And got the same kind of comments. People were like, hey, he's still growing the beard, huh? And it was like, why do you care how long his beard is? But it was just like, hey, we have acceptable rules of what you can and can't do. And that was my takeaway. Is like, I think independence is offensive to people.
Yeah, people's freedom can be a trigger. I hate ties. And the church I was at before, it was more common to preach in a tie. And so I did the whole, sort of Jim from The Office. Like the tie was there, but it was loose and there was a button undone. And Mary Sloane's mother, may she rest in peace, she came up to me and she was very stern. She said, Anthony, this is not a fashion show. And then just sort of like trotted away. I'm sorry. I don't feel like the need to choke myself every time I get up to preach.
Nice. Well, here you are. You found yourself, and we celebrate you.
Thank you. So
let's talk about what we're drinking, and then we're going to have a fun conversation together. I am drinking a 2023 Grenache. This is from Story of Soil. It's from California. And just a beautiful light color, as you'd expect a Grenache. And this thing is very fruit forward in some fun ways. I'm getting dried strawberry, red grapefruit, and orange peel. So kind of that bite of that citrus note is what I'm getting. And weather's warming up in Arizona. I'm enjoying it. It feels nice. So that's what I'm sipping on. What have you got in your glass?
Yeah, so I went to my grocery store, Wegmans. Shout out to Wegmans, the best grocery store, and typed in Malbec because I knew I'm not a wine connoisseur. I don't know what Grenache is, but I knew I liked Malbecs. And I typed it in, and up came a white Malbec. So for those who don't have video, you're looking at me holding up a glass of a Malbec, which is supposed to be a red wine. It is not red. It is white. So when I got it, I was curious, like, is it going to taste like a red wine, but they just somehow removed the color, which is not how wine works, I realize. But, like, no, it tastes like a white wine, but it's using Malbec grapes. And it's on the fruity side. Like, it's lighter and not particularly dry. But it's good. It's flavorful. It's a 2024 Artisanal de Argento. It's a grocery store wine, so I don't think it's anything particularly fancy, but it meets the moment. Because it is not warming up in DC. We've had an unusually cold and snowy winter, and
you guys are going the opposite direction.
Oh my gosh, it's been awful. Yes.
Well, cheers to you, and cheers to any of our listeners if you are able to enjoy a glass with us today as well. Okay, question I love to ask people so that our listeners can get a feel for your journey, a little bit about you, is if you were to look at the last 10 years of your life, last 10 years of your own faith journey, how would you describe that your faith has changed just in that window of time?
Yeah, Jesus Christ, Jeremy. I knew you were going to ask this question. I was like, oh, okay. So like everything has happened in the past.
It's been a big 10 years for you, has it?
It's been a big 10 years. So 10 years, I mean, we've been in the era of Trump for the past 10 years.
Yeah.
10 years ago, I was pastoring a church in Northwest Iowa. And, honestly, Iowa was very conservative, but sort of, they were quiet about their conservatism. And I was coming at my ministry from a fairly apolitical approach of, I don't need to talk about politics. I just need to talk about the gospel. Trump gets elected, and things that I had assumed were sort of settled issues were not. So when the Trump administration, the first one, was caging children at the border, I threw something on my, at that time, Facebook feed and maybe my blog about how, Christians should be embarrassed by this. We need to be taking a stand, and got so much pushback. And I just found that bewildering. And, as things were happening with the murder of black folks by police, and saying, hey, the police shooting, killing people on the street, particularly black folks, this is something that we cannot stand for. And getting pushback of, well, you don't know the circumstances and what were they doing, and they should have just obeyed. And then I began to feel more and more discomfort about not talking about politics as a preacher. Because if Jesus' primary message is the kingdom, a political word, of God, then why wouldn't it intersect with our politics today? Then 2018, my brother died while driving drunk, and he had this beautiful comeback story because he had struggled with alcoholism since he was a teenager, and then lost his job and went back to the bottle, and that led to his death. And it was this, family tragedy that then forced me to start rejiggering a bunch of my own theology around God's will and bad things happening in the world. And I was never a Calvinist. I was never like every God means, to harm people and give them cancer and death for his glory. I was never like, a follower of John Piper or anything. But that is what eventually pushed me into open theism and open and relational theology, of understanding that God has some limits on what they're capable of doing or not doing in the world, which we can talk about. So then by that point, it was becoming more and more clear that our family was not going to hack it much longer in Iowa. In 2020, that's when we moved out here to DC to pastor the Table Church, and got here. My first act as pastor was to move everything virtual for the pandemic. And then, pastored virtually for a year, dealt with January 6th happening in our city and the effects that had on our congregation, and becoming a pastor where my theology had to meet practicality, where I was no longer just, LGBTQ affirming in my mind, but pastoring a church that was, mostly majority queer, not just anti-racist in my head, but actually a multiracial community. And that's a very different context than Northwest Iowa. So have had to change a lot of how I show up as a pastor, and my theology has had to mature tons and tons and tons under that sort of pressure.
That was such a balanced and nuanced answer to that question, because I think a lot of people look at maybe some of the conversations we have on this podcast, and I can imagine someone maybe leaning more conservative would say, well, how did you arrive there? How, you're taking these extreme stances. And yet the reality is when you unpack it, this is a journey that many of us have walked down. And, we didn't start where we are right now. This has been like, hey, these things that we're seeing are kind of weird. Let's call them out. And then when you get called out for calling out things that you think are pretty simple, like I had, as you were talking, you're giving me flashbacks, because I was a lead pastor when the whole immigrant in the cage thing was the story. Yeah. And I wrote this blog post at the time, and just like thinking that this was going to be a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Rally the church. Yeah. We cannot believe
if the church agrees about anything, it's about the immigrant and the stranger, right?
Right. Oh, and kids, right?
kids.
Pro-life, and these kids are being locked in cages. And I mean, I just remember thinking like, this is like not controversial. This is like, this is what we do. And having an elder in my church just like go off on me of like, hey, I cannot believe you wrote that. And I just remember my own confusion, like legitimately going, what am I missing here? Because I can't even fathom what you're saying to me. Like, I thought we would agree this is bad. And it's like, no, they shouldn't be doing what they're doing. And it's like you're saying, and so then you start going, okay, well, I'm going to have to not only keep talking, but I'm going to have to talk louder. I'm going to have to raise my voice. And then what we've watched for 10 years, that's why this question is interesting with the current time, is we've watched for 10 years the culture and the church collectively go that direction.
Yeah.
And then the people, who say, hey, I have a problem with this. This doesn't look like Jesus. Not only are you battling, the voices of our culture, but now you're battling a lot of the church. And that's kind of a funky place to be in.
It's a really tough place to be in. And I'm 6 years into my ministry here in DC, and I feel like I am only, the memes come around every New Year's of like, here comes 2026, and I'm still processing 2020. And like, that's very much the case. I'm still coming to grips with the relationships that had to die and have, what Cloud and Townsend called necessary conclusions, necessary endings.
Necessary endings,
necessary endings from folks that we did ministry with for 10 years. And we're doing a sermon series in our church right now about Jeremiah, and Jeremiah is the prophet who failed, right? He warned and warned and warned his people that this was going to happen. And they're just like, nothing bad's going to happen. And then Jeremiah is the prophet who writes Lamentations. Like, it happened. And Jeremiah, not to pat myself on the back too much, but Jeremiah and I have like both called to ministry at the age of 14 as young adults or teenagers, and feeling the like, we told you, we saw this coming. That feeling of disillusionment and disenchantment with the church that brought us up and the God that brought us up, and to see all those folks be like, nah, nothing bad's going to happen. And if bad stuff is happening, at least it's not happening to me. And we're just fine with it. And just pulling your hair out, being, I cannot believe that these were the folks that I thought I saw Jesus in, and now they've turned away so completely.
Yeah, it's a pretty disorienting feeling.
Yeah.
When the people who introduced you to Jesus are the ones who are concerned where Jesus has taken you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know a lot. I mean, I just hear a lot of these stories of like, I'm having this conversation with my parents or my community or my, like family members, and, they're super concerned about me. And yet they're just following Jesus. Like, they introduced me to Jesus. And I think that's what a lot of people are wrestling with right now. It's like, how do you navigate that? Like, these are the people that introduced me.
Yeah.
And then they look at you and go, you've gone off the deep end.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm still one who does believe in invisible powers, so things like demons and principalities and things like that. And nothing is monocausal. I know there's a 1,000 causes for everything that's happening in the United States and world right now, but I think at least one of those causes are these invisible powers, because the sort of spiritual inability to see or understand seems supernatural to me. That something can be so blatantly and so obviously evil and wrong, and for folks to confuse that with Jesus.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to ascribe that to, but something supernaturally evil.
Well, and then you talk about these idea of like strongholds, right?
Yeah.
Like the stronghold of racism in the history of the United States. Like it's not just an evil. It is a particular, kind of evil that has roots deeper down than I think any of us have any real idea of.
Yeah.
And, there's people who are trying to tell us how deep it goes, and yet those voices often get sidelined of like, yeah, it's not that bad. But yeah, I mean, we're systemic evils and some of these things we're going up against. And yeah, I'm grateful for you and for your voice on this podcast, because a lot of times, I try to have guests that are thinking critically, thinking deeply about Jesus. But in all different arenas. You know, I've had guests on here that are still intrigued by Jesus, but don't follow Jesus anymore.
Sure.
I've had, you know, pastors who used to be pastors and then they left, and, you know, all walks of this, right? Professors and scholars and all this. You are currently in the ministry. You're currently in the trenches. And so I think it's helpful to have, you know, perspective from someone who you are addressing these things that you're seeing. You're also doing it in a pastoral role, currently shepherding a community. And, you know, I think it's helpful to hear all that. One of the things I appreciate about you, and this comes out in a lot of the stuff that you write and a lot of the things that you say online, you really have a heart for people and this idea of healing and healing from trauma. And you've been very vulnerable sharing some of your own journey. And I'd love just to dive into this a little bit, because I think a lot of people, you know, it's been said of like millennials that like millennials are the first generation that are not only healing themselves, but then also trying to heal backwards. Like we're doing all that healing work. And, you know, I regularly meet with a therapist, and, you know, it's incredible. And I think we're the generation that's kind of made it okay to talk about, you know, there's obviously been counseling before, but it was kind of like, we don't really talk about it. And now we're like, no, it's healthy. Lots of us have things, you know, in the past that you're like, hey, this really hurt and this is a wound. And some of the things that you have shared, you've shared that you didn't know your biological father, and your biological mother was mentally ill, and you only lived with her till you were 7.
Yeah.
That's a lot in the first 7 years alone, right? Obviously, then that carries into the years after that. But just the start of your life, having all of that has been a lot. And then one of the things you recently wrote that I just thought was so moving was you were writing about how you had this epiphany you weren't really held as a child, and how that has shaped you as an adult. And two things, one observation, then a question. The observation is, I applaud you for just the sense in which you are navigating your own journey publicly that is then a model for others, right? To go, here's what's happened, here's how I'm processing it, here's how I'm trying to connect it in real time. Not like, I'm all healed, all that's great. This is, you know, it's like, no, I just had this realization. Like, you know, like that takes tremendous courage. And I just applaud you on that. But and the second one is, what do you think you've learned in your own journey of this, of healing? And as an adult now, what are some of those insights that you have found that you can offer to other people in their own journey?
Sure. First thing that comes to mind is thumbnail sketch of my life story was, I lived with my biological mother until I was 7. She suffered from severe paranoid schizophrenia, and schizophrenia is not the like hearing voices in your head or multiple personality disorder. It is a fractured single personality. And the paranoia piece is just the inability to trust anyone or anything, institutions or people. So I was born with a hole in my heart, multiple holes in my heart, a bunch of birth defects that were left untreated for those first 7 or 8 years because she had no trust of the medical system. So I was slowly sort of suffocating from a lack of oxygen while being cared for in quotation marks, neglected and abused by my biological mother. And I was then put into the foster care system, and I was eventually adopted. And there is, within evangelicalism, we love a good testimony, right? So my testimony was packaged. It was made into a commodity. And I used that testimony from like the age of, I got saved. I was always in the church, but I sort of gave my life to Jesus when I was like 12, and then was active in my youth group from like 13 forward. Knew I wanted to be a pastor from really early on. And so used this commodity in my testimony for years. And it wasn't until the death of my brother and I started more actually doing therapy where I realized that my life had become a commodity, something that I could package up pretty and put a bow on it. And here's a beautiful life story about how God rescued me from this terrible situation. And so when I realized that is what had happened to my own life, and I was talking about me as a 7-year-old as some other person, then I, with the help of the therapist, shut that all down. And I did not talk about my own personal life for a good long time, because as preachers, as pastors, you're sort of encouraged to, cut yourself and bleed into your sermon and share that with a congregation so it gets a good response. And there's something really, I understand the impulse, right? Like when I teach preachers how to preach, you want there to be some personal aspect that you're giving. And also, like, I don't know if you should be cutting yourself and pouring your own lifeblood in that sort of way. So I shut that down for a long time so I could continue and actually start some healing work of recognizing, like, oh, no. All those things that I was calling like a good and wonderful testimony of rescue were actually a whole bunch of traumas and ruptures, relational ruptures in my life that were setting me in patterns that would continue for decades without my noticing, of needing to be a rescuer and to hide imperfections and all of that sort of stuff. And a constant state of anxiety about every single relationship. Then, as I was beginning to learn that about myself and the effects of trauma on the brain and on childhood development and on myself, then I was recognizing all of that in my faith as well, and the faith of so many other people. We also have an attachment relationship with whatever it is that we call God. And that can be filled with anxiety or fear. It can be filled with, the God of judgment and anger, or not. I did not have a father figure for the first 10 years of my life. And so trying to port that all onto God, but I didn't know, all I knew about God is that God was angry about all of my mistakes. And if I didn't confess those mistakes, then he had no choice but to condemn me to hell. Like all of that stuff, which of course then affects how I see my own parents, and it just becomes this vicious cycle. So then, as I am beginning to understand that, like, oh, this is affecting people's spiritual lives as well, that really began to hone in my sort of life work of, oh, I don't want to just be a pastor who's really good at proclaiming the gospel-centered ministry and all that jazz. I want to help people heal from their relational and spiritual, and turns out lots of other kinds of trauma as well. And the work of that healing is life work. It's lifelong, and it can't be coercive. So much of spiritual formation and discipleship in churches that I've experienced is like, hey, we need to coerce you to grow in some way, as opposed to what any good childhood development expert would talk about, which is creating environments in which people can grow into who they really are. But you've got a bunch of Christians in pews and they're like, hey, you're an acorn and we want to turn you into an airplane, as opposed to like, hey, you're an acorn and we want to put you in an environment where you can grow into an oak tree. And I'm sick and tired of spiritual environments, church environments that like are just trying to mechanize people's growth coercively and turn it into, an industry of some sort.
Well, because that's what then those are the tangible results.
We love our our KPIs. We love charts that go up and to the right.
I mean, truly, when you have KPIs in a church, which many churches do, is a funky thing. To what are we measuring? How do we define success? And the two most common ones are obviously attendance and then giving. Those are the easiest kind of holistic things that you can measure as well. We're growing.
Yeah.
There's more butts in the seats, and the giving's up and to the right, and things must be good. But then you start trickling down. I found baptism numbers are another huge one where it's like, well, obviously we're dialed in because look at these baptism numbers, and yet a lot of the times you look under the hood of these people being baptized, and it's kind of a one and done. We saved you. Gave you your get out of hell free card, and you didn't become a different person. It wasn't a transformational moment. It wasn't, hey, I began this profound journey or anything. It was, hey, I crossed the line. I'm good. And, I've heard hilarious stories about people who literally, one of the funniest ones the pastor was told me is this guy in this church was getting baptized. As he comes up out of the water, he looks over and he notices that one of the musicians on the stage he had beef with, like he had something, and he like books it to this guy to like try and like fight him right after he was baptized, you know? And it's just like, hey, I think maybe we should slow it down a little bit, and like maybe that one was rushed. Like maybe let's give it some time.
Jesus' story goes. If you go to the altar and there's something you have against your brother, go and fight him.
Yeah, I think that's a little different understanding of what, you know, he was bringing that day. But I just remember thinking like, okay, I think we should measure more than that, right? And I love what you're talking about. And the phrase that came to mind as I was listening to you is the idea of liminal space. Mm-hmm. Liminal space is where you have left behind where you were. You're on your way to something new, but you're not there yet. Yeah. So you're in this in between. And, you know, as I was listening to you talk, I'm like, that's the tricky part in church community, is that you have to create that culture, like you're saying, for the acorn to be able to grow. But there might be a while that acorn is still under the ground. Yeah. And you don't see anything, right? And it's the liminal space. It's not a tree yet. It has not grown into what it could be, but it's not just the acorn anymore. And so you can't measure it. It doesn't show up on your KPIs. It doesn't give you this story of look what God is doing in this community. And yet, I think we both would argue the church could be doing absolutely what the church needs to do in providing that environment. Right. So how do we create communities? How do we create spaces for the liminal space, for the in-between? Because I suspect many people listening to this are probably really familiar with liminal space and the feeling of that in their own journey.
Yeah. So because of my own story, I've done a bunch of training on like trauma competency and trauma competent care. And the good news, bad news of trauma is that it does change your brain. It changes your physiology and your psychology. And there is the possibility of healing. And that's where you have to create psychologically safe environments for people to experience that healing. And psychological safety is a very individual thing. It is not something that you can package up and produce en masse. I was actually just talking to a friend of mine who's he's a public health expert in like gun violence, gun safety, and criminal justice. And he was talking about a treatment program that was designed by Black men for Black men, on, dealing with violence, gun violence, things like that, criminal justice. And it was a very successful program. And so they were trying to bring it to like drug treatment courts. And the drug treatment court said, great, we love this. We're going to give it to this white dude who's a former sheriff. And it's not just going to be for Black men, it's going to be for everybody. And come and find out that program fails miserably because everything that was unique and special and particular to it had been, literally sort of whitewashed and homogenized and generalized across this massive population. And so it all just failed. And that's where any sort of spiritual formation or discipleship that happens in the church, anything that's supposed to bring you growth or healing that you try to homogenize, does not create felt safety, because it's basically saying your problems, your trauma, your story, we can apply that to everybody. And like, that's the opposite of safety. That makes you feel like a cog in the machine. And I'm hypersensitive to that. Our church, this was before my time, was really a big fan of ARC, the Association of Related Churches, and they put out this program called Growth Tracks, and Growth Tracks is supposed to be this newcomer assimilation pathway. And like, just the word assimilation gives me hives, right? Of we are going to make you squeeze into the Play-Doh mold of this church. And in terms of a success rate of getting volunteers, it was great. But in terms of creating safety where people felt like they could grow, it was atrocious, because it was, hey, we're going to make you do a spiritual gifts assessment in 15 minutes. Turns out every one of those spiritual gifts lines up perfectly with one of the volunteer teams that you can join on a Sunday. How about that coincidence? That does not create safety, and that does not heal people from trauma. And in any given room of 2 or more people, there is going to be unique individual hurts and pains and hangups and traumas and scars and wounds that have to be cared for and tended for, which is why I just get very suspicious of any sort of institution or program in spiritual spaces. And Christians are particularly egregiously guilty of this, but it's not just Christians. Any sort of religious or spiritual program that says like, hey, we're going to copy and paste this onto you and you're going to have success in 10 days or less, it's lying to you, and it's just setting you up for more wounds.
Well, it almost becomes the prosperity preacher, hitting you with the coat, and
Yes.
you're supposed to fall down. And so it's like, I'm supposed to fall down. That's what happens when this happens. And I think a lot of people, okay, I'm in this assimilation model. This is what I do because this is what happens. So it's like you convince yourself of it because you want it to be true.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is like that doesn't create the real environment of what you might actually need. And so then there's going to be a point of dissonance there where you've gone with the model, you've tried to make it true because you want it to be true, but then you're like, oh, this isn't actually meeting my unique situation or what I'm going through. And I love that image of like, we have to figure out how do we create safe environments truly for everybody. And it's way messy when you think about how complex the amount of people and what they're bringing in, and then we try to systematize it.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very, very messy. And it's a very funny context doing it in DC because DC, we fit the cliches of like, we've got a bunch of lawyers at our church, people who love policy. And I'm like, y'all, we can't policy this. It's going to be much trickier and stickier. And yeah, you as a community, and I think this puts a ceiling on how big a community can get. As a community, you have to decide, are we okay with this kind of messiness happening? And being, a big part of trauma competency is always being clear and forthright about expectations. So when, if I have a lunch or coffee with a newcomer, you should know no one's trying particularly hard to pretend to be perfect here. So don't expect that. And that may mean that you're going, like, there's going to be conflict and there's going to be hurt. And that's not something we're necessarily proud of. We're not aiming to hurt people. But when you have a bunch of people who have been hurt, then it's going to come up again. And you have to be forthright and forthcoming about that. And some people are like, no, I'd much rather go to a church that's got its shit figured out. And that's fine. I can point you in the right direction. But if you're willing to hang with some folks who are very willing to admit, I don't have my shit figured out, then this might be the place for you.
I love that. That's a refreshing honesty there. Okay, you mentioned something earlier I want to follow up on. You talked about what happened with your brother.
Yeah.
Sounds like that was a turning point for you with open and relational theology.
Yeah.
And that you had to rework probably your idea of God and how God interacted to make sense of what was going on. You and I both share a love for open and relational theology. It's something that in the spaces I come from, it is viewed as a heresy. And when I started getting into it, I had no end of warnings of people telling me how slippery the slope is. And I'm a few decades in now. Yeah. I still love Jesus.
What are the spaces you come from? Just out of curiosity.
Very evangelical,
Okay.
Mega church, Christian church denomination background.
Got it.
And,
Yep.
And so, which again had a lot of good things to it that I really enjoyed. Theologically, it's a very guarded space where, it's a lot of these other traditions are viewed very skeptically. And so when I started, I almost lost my ordination over this because at that point I hadn't figured it all out yet, but I was, in my 20s and I'm like, yeah, there's like this thing with Hezekiah that's kind of messing with me. And, I think God can change his mind and like all this stuff. And, the elder board that was assigned to me, like, was not having it. But early on, I was like, there's got to be more to this. Well, then I kept going down that road, and obviously I'm fully in it now. And so I'm always curious when I meet someone else that has found a home in this theology and this way of understanding. I'm curious more of like, what was your journey into it? What did this offer you in that season that you're like, oh, wow, this makes way more sense than any other way of trying to process this?
Yeah. So my first introduction with it, backing up. Okay. Grew up, once I was adopted, then was in a very conservative and very fundamentalist space. Homeschooled in Pensacola Christian Academy, Abeka schools, KJV only, independent fundamental Baptist sort of environment.
It's good enough for Jesus, good enough for you,
That's
right?
right, exactly right. And my church was very classic rapture theology, dispensationalist, all of that sort of stuff. But the denominational college, Bethel now University in Mishawaka, Indiana, so not the Bethel in Minneapolis, but the one in Indiana, was actually not that, and had a really great religion philosophy department at the time, which has since then been sort of killed by the denomination, go figure. And they were the first ones who introduced me to sort of the spectrum of, all the way from hard determinism, Calvinism, to process theology.
Wow, I'm amazed they even introduced it.
That college did an astoundingly good job of educating and not indoctrinating, just really, really well done. And that was honestly, I didn't have a classic sort of deconstruction. We didn't call it that back in the early 2000s, but classic deconstruction. It was just gradual education and being allowed to come to my own conclusions, which was really, really great coming out of fundamentalism. But process theology, open and relational theology did not appeal to me. I think we read a Four Views book that had a process theologian, and I'm pretty sure.
Oh yeah, Divine Foreknowledge, Four Views. That was the book that changed me.
Yeah, that book did not change me.
That was the book. It's so funny you bring that book up. Yeah. That book was the first time I ever heard of the open view of God.
Okay, was Greg
I didn't even
Boyd
know
the
it
contributor?
existed.
Who was
What's
Who was Greg?
That
Boyd
was Greg Boyd.
Yeah. Okay.
So then that takes me on the road where I'm like, who's this Greg Boyd guy? Then I read God of the Possible, and then I'm off and running. But that was how that book. It's just funny you mentioned. I still keep that book on my bookshelf because it was I don't think I'll ever read it again, but it was just so emotional. That book found me at the right time.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. So it did not do it for me at the time, because I think at that point I was coming out of the sort of Baptist 4-point tulip dispensationalist sort of thing. And so when I read the Arminian view, that was what settled in me, was the sort of classic free will Arminianism. And so all the open theism stuff sort of laid rest for a while. Then I did seminary at Asbury Theological, again, by any standard, a conservative evangelical seminary, but again, also had professors who were really good at educating and not indoctrinating. And so it was in some of my theology courses where we started to explore the open and process side of that spectrum, where I began to move that direction. But as you said, and as I said, the death of my brother created this crisis to really start thinking these things through. I've been blessed with the mindset that I've never questioned the existence of God or the goodness of God. That has always been sort of bedrock core to me. And I say blessed in that I don't begrudge anybody who has not had that experience. There are plenty of reasons to doubt the existence and goodness of God. 100% understand that. So to me, it's not any sort of pat on my own back. It is just it's not something I've struggled with. So when David died and I was like, well, if I believe God is good, then how do I make sense of the world as it is? And, C.S. Lewis talks about this in A Grief Observed when he's writing about the death of his wife, Joy, and the sort of guilt, shame, but also inevitable feeling of the world has had suffering in it since forever. Why is it that it's only upon the death of my loved one that I begin to, question all of these things? But that's where I was. And so that's when I went back to the Four Views book and went back to Greg Void and started reading up again on open theism. And this is where the trauma piece comes in for me of I simply cannot, there is just a hardwire block in my brain, heart, and soul. I cannot believe in a coercive God. So, my mom was my adoptive mom was the sort who would thank God for a good parking spot at the grocery store. And I just remember thinking as a kid, what does that mean? Like God had to play chess with everybody's lives to make it so that at this exact moment, at this exact time, Deb Parrott gets a parking spot. I don't like that at all. And fast forward, 20 years to the death of my brother and thinking like, okay, if that's true, if God is not playing chess, then what are all the things that God is incapable of doing? That, of course, very quickly leads to reading Dr. Ord, Thomas Ord, and God Can't. And okay, we know that there are things God can't do. God cannot lie. God cannot reject his own creation. I'll go down the list. Can God create evil? Can God create suffering? And can God, is God capable of stopping suffering and just refuses not to because of some, 9-dimensional chess that God is playing? Or is it rather that God has created the world and such, and the way that Dr. Ord would put it, God is the kind of God that creates the kind of world that God is not going to intervene because it's against their non-coercive nature. And as someone who experienced neglect and abuse and was passed around from foster family to foster family, I have to believe that God is not that kind of coercive God that is playing 9-dimensional chess with all of our lives. And I find that, I think people do typically tend to split. Some people find that deeply disturbing, and some people find it deeply comforting. And I'm one that finds it deeply comforting. Thank God that God is not playing 9-dimensional chess with our lives, and that God sees the pain and the trauma and the hurt and the pain. And it's not that God saw it, predicted it, saw it coming in the future, and chose to do nothing. Because that to me is just inexcusable. And if that God exists, I have no interest in worshiping that God. Rather, it's that God has given creation freedom, and that God cannot single-handedly, coercively change people and circumstances to prevent pain, and rather is the kind of God who enters into the world to experience that pain along with us.
That's beautiful. I remember talking to Tom Ord after he wrote God Can't.
Yeah.
And I asked him that question. I said, are people encouraged by this or discouraged? And, if you hand that book to someone who just lost a brother, who lost a loved one, who, and you say, well, God couldn't do that. Is that an encouraging idea or discouraging? And, obviously he's like, it's very encouraging, and I have since found, I think it's dependent on your personality.
Yeah.
Because I think it's the way you make sense of things. And so I have found, it is encouraging to me. It's compelling to me. Everything you just said, I go, amen, amen, amen.
Yep.
And yet I've also met the people, and I've pastored people who lost a child. And I remember sitting through that, processing that grief with them. And they said, well, God, this must be what God wanted. And I remember in that moment, I'm like, okay, I'm giving them space to grieve. This is their grief. But also I feel like they're adding another layer to it that makes it worse, And so I tried to just very gently say, hey, I think you can make room that it wasn't God that took your child from you, that there is a different way of understanding this, and that God is equally grieving with you. And they just were like, no, absolutely not. Like, this is God, and that, but it was their way of finding peace with it.
Yeah.
And so again, I was like, okay, I'm going to let you have your grief.
Right. It's a be pastoral malpractice. Be like, let's talk theology. Yeah.
Right. But everything inside of me is like, no, that kind of God's a monster, like that's, don't conclude that. But also like you're grieving and, you got to process it. But this is where, some people, like, we're the kind of guys, I assume you are too, that, love reading theology books.
Of course.
These are the books that a lot of people would never want to read in a million years, or they would fall asleep reading, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, I'm aware, I read the books that other people don't want to read. I get it. I acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But this is not just some intellectual, it tickles my brain and it feels good.
Right.
It directly intersects with how we make sense of pain. with grief, with suffering. And those are massive things that when you are dealing with them, then you pull upon whatever theology you've got, because you start realizing my world is crashing down around me. I can't make sense of anything. And then you start going, what is God doing in all this? And that's when you need that theological framework.
Yeah.
So even like my own journey, you know, when I stepped away from being a lead pastor in 2020, the roughest, most brutal season of my life, and the sense of loss and all of that. And everyone always asks me, like, are you and God okay? It's like, God and I are fine, because I had theologically already worked all this out.
Yeah.
The church and I have some work to do, but God and I are fine, you know? And it was like, that's why theology matters. That's why if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, yeah, some of these ideas, I never thought about these. Like, this is why these conversations matter, because when you get into these situations, you start drawing upon, okay, how do you make sense of pain and suffering?
Yeah. If excuse me, if I ever end up doing doctoral work, it's going to be at this intersection of trauma, competency, and open and relational theology, because I just think that the cross pollination between those two are so ripe for real life implications. If we are worshiping a God that is capable of stopping pain but chooses not to, that is a sort of a sin of omission, or a trauma of omission. It's a form of neglect. You know, in Scott McKnight talks a lot about this. There's two kinds of pastoral abuse, and that is the sort of active pastoral abuse. I am going to actively harm you as a pastor. I'm going to do something, you know, sexual abuse, physical abuse, whatever. There's also neglect of, I'm going to be, I'm going to be the megachurch pastor of 2000, and I will never know your name, and you will end up at the hospital, and I will never be aware, because there's just too many of you for me to do it. Or even, you know, the church of 100, and I'm going to withhold relationship for you because you stopped tithing. That's abuse as well. And similarly, if we have concocted a theology of God that says God is capable of fixing all of our problems, but we haven't prayed hard enough, we didn't have enough faith, we sinned when we were in third grade, whatever, so God's not going to fix your problems, that's a different kind of abuse of God. It's the abuse of neglect, and that's going to do some real work, some real nasty work on our souls, if that's the God that we are turning our attention to in worship and prayer and all of that. Of, oh, I just need to appease this God a little bit more, and maybe I won't have so much pain. I would much, much rather believe that God is with me in the pain, that God is Emmanuel in the pain, and that God is doing everything within their power as a non-coercive God to help the world in its pain. And that also there are lots of other powers that are working against God's will, and God, because of their nature, is not going to override their will. That is a God I'd much rather be interested in, and is not causing me neglect and abuse, because that God is active, that God is doing everything within their power, and that God does not single-handedly, coercively change the world and change people's minds and brains and wills in order to get what they want. Rob Bell asked that question, years and years ago, and I think Velvet Elvis, maybe it was God Wants to Save Christians too, but the idea of that, does God always get what they want? No, of course not. God cannot possibly be getting what they want. Look at the world. Look at the pain. If you answer yes to that question, then you have lived a life that is just completely and totally blind and insensitive to the pain in the world. And that's where, the first 10 years of my ministry, I worked in a Reformed church, so with a Calvinist framework. Wow. And that's where I can get really fired up pretty quickly of like, if you can look at the world, John Piper, and say, yes, God is getting exactly what they want out of this, then that God is no better than Satan.
Well, and then
why do you have us drink wine? Jesus Christ, Jeremy.
Because we get these beautiful hot takes
yes,
that you're dropping right now. you get to these specific situations of like, hey, God, can you heal, can you heal my daughter? Can you, and it's like, no.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, so you could, but you just choose not to. And then to me, and this is what Ord does such a brilliant job of, is then you have this monstrous view of God that you can't avoid, because you start going, why is God arbitrarily, it's like, well, God could do all these things. God is all powerful, but God just is busy. God just didn't have a chance to, or for some holy reason that you don't understand.
It's
chose
the back of the tapestry. That was always the metaphor in youth group of the tapestry is beautiful, but if you look on the backside, it's ugly, and you're just looking at the backside now. But someday in heaven, you'll see the front side of the tapestry, and it'll be gorgeous. I'm like, no, there is no world in which the death of my daughter or the death of my brother or whatever is made beautiful. Absolutely not. Yeah.
Amen to that. All right. On that note, let's transition. I want to ask you a couple wine questions. And then we're gonna ask you some questions that we like to ask each guest and see how your answers compare.
Okay.
So to begin with, and this can be anything, if I were to say, Anthony, what's the best glass of wine you've ever had in your life? Is there a story that comes to your mind? Is it who you were with, where you were, type of wine you were drinking? What is that moment for you to go, that was the best wine I've ever had?
Yeah, so I've got two stories. One is a sort of a white whale story. We were at a pastoral retreat in Kalispell, Montana, so outside of Glacier National Park, and my wife Emily and I were able to experience the mountains, do some hiking, and then had dinner at this Italian restaurant. And the sad thing about the story is I don't know what the wine was. It was this wonderful glass of white wine that we both loved, and particularly my wife Emily loved. And we didn't take a photo of the menu. They didn't have a website. We flew away and never got the name of it. And it's like, what was it? We'll never know. It's gone. It was a wonderful glass of wine, and it is lost to history, the sands of time.
I mean, do you feel like you could ever Google your retrace your steps?
So I mean, back then we did Google and tried to retrace our steps, and probably should have just called the restaurant at that point and been like, "What was the wine?" But now that's been 10 years ago, so it's too late.
It is the white whale. It's gone.
It's gone. It's gone. And then the second one, again, I am not a connoisseur, so I couldn't tell you. I just could tell you that again, me and my wife Emily, we were in Cinque Terre, Italy. And Italy knows a thing or two about a nice bottle of wine.
They do. They've got wine figured out.
Yes. And so we were at one of those restaurants down at the Mediterranean Ocean where they serve you the fish with the head on it. Like it's this beautiful seafood plate and pasta. And then you ordered the house red, whatever it was. And the house red was the best red I've ever had. And was it? I don't know. Was it the environment? Probably. But that is just I remember sitting there and just being like, this is the life. And the thing about Cinque Terre at that point when we went, this is before my daughter was born, so more than 10 years ago. And it had not been super touristy-ized yet. So I just thinking this is how some people live every day. They wake up and they're on the Mediterranean Ocean. They wake up and they drink this wine. And having that thought as an American of being life could be so much better.
Yeah, Europe's dangerous when you start traveling and you're like, this is pretty fantastic.
It's pretty good. Those socialist leftists over there in Europe, they have a thing or two on us, it turns out.
There's some beauty there I have found as well. All right, which member of church history would you trust to pick out a bottle of wine for you?
Yeah, so I did some homework.
Who would you not trust?
Yeah, I did some homework on this. And,
okay, I like it.
My selection is Hildegard of I don't know how to say this, Bingen. But she literally grew up around wine, and she called it the blood of the earth. So I've got some quotes. She wrote about wine as medicine. She talked about there was heart wine and cough wine and fortified wine that give you strength. And she said wine, quote, enjoyed in moderation, heals and delights people deeply through its great strength and warmth.
Come on now.
She knew the difference between heavy wines that needed to be cut with better water or lighter ones that didn't. She also warned against wines that would make you urinate before it was you were at the place to urinate. So she knew all of the abilities of wine. And so I'm like, okay, Hildegard, you got me with your mysticism and contemplative Christianity, and please choose a bottle of wine for me.
It sounds like she has tried quite a bit of wine.
I think she knew. She knew she had partied at some point and been like, I have to pee and I can't stop myself. I drank too much.
Yeah. Avoid this bottle. This bottle's dangerous.
Yes.
Okay, that's a fantastic answer. Who do you not trust?
I mean, you can see my my anti-reformed theology coming out. I do not trust Augustine or Calvin with choosing my bottles of wine, because they're just going to make you feel bad about it. You know, Augustine's the sort who's like, you know, love is whatever. Augustine had some really shitty ideas about love. Love is whatever we think love needs to be. So if that means killing people, that's love. And then, you know, Calvin was bringing capital punishment to Geneva for people who didn't follow the book of church order. And so I just like, no, if you're going to bring capital punishment to the church, I don't trust you to pick my wine. Yeah.
That's solid, but I'm going to throw a wrench in this.
Okay.
Calvin's French and was a big wine guy.
Was he a big
And I don't like his theology either, but he could have been a solid wine guy.
Was he a big wine guy? Like, did he know?
He has a quote that I'll butcher it off the top of my head, but basically like compares the way that our hearts are gladdened by a glass of wine to the way that the Spirit of God can gladden us. Like, makes us like it's the same thing. And I've always thought like that's such a beautiful like, oh,
even
this guy had some good wine.
Even what is it? Even a dead clock is right twice a day. So I guess Calvin gets 1 point.
I mean, I'm not defending the guy. I'll let the record say.
Calvin shows up at the pearly gates, and Peter's like, "Well, you had one thing right.
Your views of wine are not bad. You can come in."
Yeah,
that's great. All right, what's something you used to believe that it turned out later you were wrong about?
I mean, everything at some point. I mean, I was wrong about most things. Let's be clear. I mean, just like coming out of fundamentalism, I am glad that social media did not exist in 2003 or whatever, and may have even had to delete some stuff from 2005, like when we were all posted on Facebook. So, you know, women in leadership, queer inclusion, eternal conscious torment, all things I now think I was wrong about. And of course, like I want to hold, I think it's an N.T. Wright quote of like, you know, 60% of what I believe is probably wrong. I just don't know what 60%. Like, got to hold that today as well. And like, I keep a list of personal values, and one of them is keep evolving. Like the idea of never being settled in, or like completely and utterly concrete and yep, I've got it figured out, is very, very important to me. There's a important person in my life who once told me like, oh, I don't need to read anymore. I know everything I need to know. And that was just a dagger to my heart of just like, no, please, you have to keep learning. So many things. I think on the less serious side, I used to be like a PC guy. I built my own PCs and Android. I'd build my own towers and, you know, jailbreak my Android phones. And now I'm just a very basic MacBook and iPhone guy. I'm not that basic. I'm in the terminal. I'm a nerdy guy. So I used to think Apple was like, oh, that's for the people who don't care about technology and don't want to like tinker with their technology. And now I know that's wrong. Like Apple's based on Unix and you can do all sorts of nerdy, crazy things. So don't let anybody tell you otherwise.
That's the first PC versus Apple answer I think we've got to that
Good.
question.
I'm glad to bring that energy here.
I like it. What do you see as the main issue facing Christianity in the U.S. today?
Oh, man. I know, listening to some of the answers in this podcast before, like Christian nationalism comes up. I wonder about sort of the thing behind the thing. What is it that makes Christian nationalism so appealing to the church in America? So I wonder if the combination of anti-intellectualism plus combined with power seeking, that's what produces Christian nationalism. Mark Knoll, Christian historian, has a famous line in his book, is the problem with evangelical thought. And the opening line of the book is, the problem with evangelical thinking is that there is no evangelical thinking.
Oh, man.
And so I think when you get anti-intellectualism plus power, it just makes you stupid.
That's a kind way to say it.
Yeah, right. Because no doubt Christian nationalism has been very successful in its ability to give certain kinds of people power. And also, like, it is a self-destructive force that is eating them alive. It's eating the country alive. It is, everything from the damn price of eggs to the reputation of Christianity, and therefore the reputation of Jesus, has been absolutely and utterly torpedoed by this movement. And I'm not saying that, like, give everybody a book and they'll all be better. But if Christians were defined by our curiosity a little bit more than we currently are, I think that would go a long ways into healing the evils of Christian nationalism and maybe helping us repent from it.
Well, I think a lot of Christians in particular, but you could go beyond to U.S. citizens, resonate with whoever told you, I don't need to read anymore. I know it all.
Yeah.
That is a collective representation of a lot of thinking.
Yeah.
And I use the word thinking loosely there.
Yeah, right.
Right. And I love that you have this idea of, like, keep growing. And, to me, curiosity is one of my favorite words. Like, be curious always. And I try to make it a personal discipline whenever I have a curious thought, like, I wonder if right? And we all have those thoughts. But what most of us do, I'm convinced, is we squelch it and we go, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, I would have to go look it up, or I have to go, I have to read a book, or I have, whatever.
Yeah.
And so we just go, I don't know. For me, I do my best when I realize there's a curious thought to chase it. Like, go chase it. Go look it up. Go, Google it, whatever. And then you often find these strings that you start pulling the string, and it starts leading you to all sorts of stuff that you go, oh my goodness, I had no idea. And you get into fascinating things. And you can do this with reading, right? If you read a phenomenal book, this is what I always encourage people, and you're just like, this book blew my mind. Go to the footnotes or the endnotes in the book. See what this author is referencing. And if you see, like, hey, this author keeps referencing this person or this book, go read that book, right? And just keep going, and you will find, like, there's so much out there.
Yeah.
And yet, I just think we're not curious. We don't care. We're content in the wrong ways. Like,
Yeah,
I know it all.
exactly.
I'm good.
Yeah, the person I mentioned who said, like, I don't, there's nothing else I need to learn, is a Christian nationalist, like a MAGA Trumper through and through. And, like, that tracks for me. Of at some point, you decided, I don't have anything else to learn. And so when a demagogue came along and said, I can fix it, and you didn't bother to look up anything that this person claimed, then of course you're going to be led astray. And I'm very conscious of my own tendencies towards being a curmudgeon and, sort of getting settled in my ways. And, like, I'm far too young for that. And also it seems to be somewhere in my DNA that's where, like, I picked my favorite coffee, 10 years ago. I don't need to change it. And having to make the conscious effort of, like, no. There's better coffee out there. You just haven't tried it yet. Or, there's a theology that's maybe put this in words that you haven't thought of yet. I've got 4 very full bookshelves full of books. I've read a lot of stuff. And then to start, co-pastoring with a black queer pastor and be realizing, like, oh, I know nothing about theology. I know the the first centimeter of a 10-mile ocean of theology. That has to be a continued path for many of us. So yeah, for Christian nationalism, for the thing that is just like wrecking the lives of millions of people every day because of the people who are in power right now, if I could wish anything upon them, I think it would be curiosity.
Love it. What's something that's blowing your mind right now? What's a great book you're reading? What's a thought you got?
I think right now, and you alluded to this a little bit earlier, is so in that blog post about some of my own trauma and hurt and pain and not being held as a child, was then moving into like meditation and contemplation. So I don't have a book to recommend, which is very against my brand. But like to bring some of that history, trauma, and the healing from the trauma into some like somatic practices, which includes meditation and contemplation. It includes for me like running and just getting more comfortable with my body. As someone who like had a bunch of birth defects, like that's what's blowing my mind right now. That I've taught trauma competent courses to folks and have taught on the like, hey, you can rewire your brain, and it becomes this sort of cliche, but to actually like start doing it, to imagine, okay, I've never been held as a child. Let's do a meditative or a contemplative exercise where I imagine God or the universe or some loving being holding me or embracing me. Turns out that will move you at a very, very deep level. And I am not one, again, for reasons related to my past, I do not connect to my emotions very well. I don't cry very easily. So to find that meditation can help me connect to emotion in a way that has been, for decades inaccessible to me, that's blowing my mind. And, when I do pastoral care or pastoral counseling with folks and they want to begin to redevelop their images of God, nobody wants to be told like meditate. Like it's an answer that it's not very popular. But I also like the more I practice it, the more I'm like, I think this is where it's at. I really do. I think the contemplative stream of Christianity and the contemplative streams of any sort of religious or even atheistic meditation practices, like really, really can make a difference. And again, not everybody's the same. I shouldn't be overly prescriptive, but for me, it's blowing my own mind.
Love it. That's good. What's something you're excited about?
Yeah, that's a good question. Mandalorian and Grogu's coming out this summer. I'm a Star Wars fan.
I saw you singled out Empire Strikes Back.
Oh yeah.
And that seemed like an interesting one to single out, as that was your Star Wars movie you referenced on your About page.
Yeah. Empire Strikes Back that's like third grade Evan Newbacher's house putting in the VHS.
Okay, so there's a time and a place there for
it's
you.
Like inside out core memory of doing that. And this is a whole side thing, like Andor, the Star Wars show. If anybody, if you are not a Star Wars fan, you should still watch Andor, because it's not just a good Star Wars show. It is a good television show. And it speaks to the fascism of our current political moment so dang well. And if you're not interested in the Force or lightsabers, good news, Andor is the show for you. And I want Star Wars in any good sci-fi. Like, it responds to current political moments. Battlestar Galactica did this. Star Wars at its zenith did this. And I beg that Star Wars was not owned by Disney, which was bending its freaking knee to the Trump administration. I don't think Mandalorian and Grogu is going to be doing a lot of political commentary, unfortunately. But I'm a sucker for Baby Yoda. And self promotion here. The other thing I'm excited about, I am nearing the conclusion. I've been writing a sort of devotional style book project that I think I've landed on a title for, called Read It Like You're Free, which is about reclaiming scripture from a bunch of the perspectives I've been talking about today. And it just sort of takes 20 or so verses of scripture and reads them through this sort of liberative lens and a trauma competent lens. And so it's for folks who, like, if you're not interested in scripture, then this book's not going to do anything for you. But if you're interested in reading scripture in a way that is liberative and healing and gives you the permission to read the Bible, this library of books of a bunch of traumatized people, in a way that sets you free, then yeah, this might be the book for you. So I'm nearing the conclusion. It's just going to be a self-published project. I'm wary of the publishing world. So I'm excited for that to be done. I have a sabbatical this summer, so my goal is to finish it this summer.
That sounds very exciting.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay. Before we wrap up, is there anything I did not ask you that you're like, look, we can't close this episode out unless I get this out?
I already talked about Star Wars.
You got Grogu. Got Empire Strikes Back when you're a kid.
Yeah. I just want to give a shout out to the anybody who has been diagnosed with OCD. I have family members who have obsessive compulsive disorder. For a quick definition, it is not how it's portrayed in Monk or TV shows. Obsessive compulsive disorder is when you are faced with intrusive, disturbing thoughts and your brain cannot get rid of those thoughts. And ever since a family member has been diagnosed with that, I've discovered that it is far more common than I have ever realized. And that it is very, very difficult to get diagnosed with OCD because a lot of primary care physicians and such sort of poo-poo the diagnosis. So if you are someone who has intrusive thoughts and you find that you can't get rid of those intrusive thoughts without, damaging behaviors, you can check out NoCD online, and they have been a deep help to our family and can help you towards a path of managing your OCD and being a full person and no longer being defined by those intrusive thoughts.
That's beautiful. I think a lot of people deal with intrusive thoughts.
Yeah.
I know a few. All right. If someone's like, hey, I like this guy, I resonate with this perspective, what's the easiest way for people to connect with you online and the different things that you're a part of?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. You can find my sort of more longer form work at my website, parrott.inc, parrott.ink. You can follow me on the socials, mostly on Threads, sometimes on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube at Pastor Parrott. That's 2 R's and 2 T's.
Which is, you got a pretty cool freaking name.
I mean, the parrot name.
And then your logo with the parrot in it. I mean, it's like your glasses. You've just found yourself. You're just living in it.
I was a substitute teacher for a year, and when you have a last name like Parrott, you have to own it. Like, you just have to own it from step one. Yes, I do want a cracker. Yes, I will repeat everything you say. That is who I am.
That's amazing. Well, Anthony, this has been a fantastic conversation with you. I so appreciate your heart. I love the way you're doing ministry. I love your openness, your evolving spirit, and you look like Jesus, you sound like Jesus, and you are bringing Jesus in real time to people. And I know a number of listeners today are going to be blessed by you as well. So thank you for taking the time to join us on this episode.
Thank you so much. That means that's the best compliment you could give me, and I really appreciate the invitation to be here.
Well, excellent. Well, everybody, thank you for joining us for another episode. We will see you on the next one of Cabernet and Pray. See you, friends.